everybody. My name is Sue Vise and I work at UNESCO Regional Office based in Bangkok in Asia Pacific. I'm here today to moderate this session on safeguarding children and youth in sport as part of the Virtual Youth Festival. It's my great pleasure to be here and to introduce our speakers and panel for today, who will all be giving different viewpoints on aspects of safeguarding and why it's everybody's business. It's not just for coaches, it's not just for organizations, it's for every single one of us, from the young person through to regional organizations and international organizations. So our first speaker, who's going to introduce the topic today, is Mr. Alexander Schischlik. Alexander is the Chief of UNESCO's Youth and Sports section. He joined UNESCO in 1993 and he's been working on the youth and sports portfolio since 2012. He's from Austria originally, and he's worked internationally for a very long period of time, and his achievements over the last 8 years while he's been working on the sport portfolio have really brought UNESCO's program a long way ahead, in particular through the Kazan Action Plan and other international instruments. So over to you, Alexander.
Hello, friends from across the sporting world. It's my great pleasure to be with you today when we are all physically separated, but we can still be together in spirit to keep the values of sport alive and support our young people through the Virtual Youth Festival. Young people are our future and should be our partners. This is the philosophy we take at UNESCO. We believe in working with youth to be part of the solutions for themselves, but also for our communities and the world. And we have seen so many examples of the amazing things that young people can achieve. At the time when many have been stuck at home for long periods of time, it is vitally important to have events such as this festival to enable young people to be part of something bigger and connect with the world. So I would like to start by thanking IIMS for conceptualizing this festival and turning it into a reality. Bravo. Especially when we see that the pandemic that has not only disrupted sport activities, it means that young people are at risk of not accessing quality education, risks of being inactive, risk of domestic violence and abuse. And there are a range of emotional risks resulting from isolation, lack of socialization, and other stress-related careers, livelihoods, health. Many have lost loved ones. Many have no income or job prospects. Some of these are new risks, and others were always there. For we have never solved all of these problems. So in our new post-COVID world, safeguarding in sport needs to continue to address the ongoing issues in sport, but now also tackle a range of new issues. Despite the cessation of much competitive sport, physical activity can play an important role in addressing these risks. I don't need to tell you this to a sporting audience. We all know the importance of sport to physical, social, and emotional well-being. Some safeguarding actions are easier than others, such as having to propose first aid on hand or providing protective equipment. But we also have to tackle the more difficult aspects, such as bullying and abuse, or well-meaning coaches that don't know they are creating distress when they push athletes too far. We have to make sure that everyone is well informed about working with children and youth, and that the environment supports and fosters the talents of the young people involved. That sport takes a holistic approach to youth development, and that the loopholes are closed. The panel now will look at the importance of everyone across the sporting world working together. Safeguarding is everyone's business, and we all need to play our part to ensure that children and youth have a positive experience, build skills, make friends, and above all have fun. From international instruments to local champions, it is the concerted effort of everyone working together that will make the most impact. So the speakers today will present perspectives from international organizations, community organization, and athletes. We need to base our efforts on knowledge, agreed standards, and concerted action. Each one plays a crucial part in bringing together our efforts in safeguarding. So let me finish by thanking and welcoming all the young people themselves. This festival is gathering young athletes from around the world. If each one of you is well informed, supportive of their peers, and knows that if there is a problem, there is someone to turn to, then he or she will also be playing their part. Well, I wish you a very successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you for those welcoming remarks, Alexander. And now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, who is going to set the scene for today's discussion and the different viewpoints that will be presented later. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Colin Higgs, who is Emeritus Professor in the School of Human Kinetics at Memorial University in Newfoundland. He is a member of the Canadian Sport for Life leadership team, and he's worked extensively across the world, particularly in developing countries, in the areas of athlete development, sport biomechanics, and social development through sport. So Colin is going to introduce us to the concepts around safeguarding, what are the issues, and what are some of the things that are being done about it.
Hello. My name is Dr. Colin Higgs, and I'm Professor Emeritus at Memorial University in Eastern Canada. And I'm honored to kick off today's discussion about child safeguarding in sport. It's really important to understand that the vast majority of adults in sport are in sport for the right reasons, and they are a positive influence on children and youth. But sport also has a problem and is a high-risk activity. And it's high risk because of access by adults to changing areas, of overnight travel to tournaments and competitions, and the very close relationship that develops between coaches and athletes. There are four major kinds of problems that we need to be aware of: neglect, physical abuse, psychological abuse, and sexual abuse. It's also very important to recognize that there is abuse in your sport. It has happened, is probably happening, and will continue to happen in the future. It can happen to males in sport, females in sport, to those who are straight, those who are gay, and those who are transgender. And the perpetrator can be the opposite sex from the victim, or can be the same sex as the victim. There are no set patterns. How prevalent is abuse in sport? Well, in Canada we've got some fairly reasonable data from the last decade, and this is specifically related to sexual abuse. And this is the number of individuals in sport who have been charged with sexual abuse of children and youth in their care, and in the red line, those who've been convicted of it. And so you can see that every year there are 20 to 30 cases, and of those about 60 to 70% are convicted. And it happens in all sports. These are again the data from Canada. Hockey and soccer are those sports that have the largest number of people charged and convicted. And third on the list, surprisingly to me, was martial arts. And I think this reflects the fact that abuse is about the power difference between the person abusing and the victim. And in martial arts, there is a very big power imbalance between those who run programs and those who are in programs. Who's at risk? First of all, everybody in sport, but some are more at risk than others. Those most at risk are those who need to please a gatekeeper, a coach who can recommend that they go to the next level of their sport, that kind of gatekeeper. But also those who are isolated and have no one to speak to. People who have no siblings, who have parents or a parent who's not engaged with the sport. They don't have close friends in the sport, and they tend to have a personality of wanting to seek approval from adults. Of those four problems in sport, neglect is probably the least common. We do see neglect where children are left alone at the end of a practice or a competition because the coach thought that somebody was coming to pick them up and there was a miscommunication. But we also see it in failure to provide hydration, water, particularly in hot temperatures. And we see neglect where people in sport use poor or ill-fitting equipment and have neglected the safety of facilities. Physical abuse is fairly easy to see. It's striking, slapping, pushing, shoving. It's also when training is used as a punishment, where if somebody does not perform well, they're forced to run extra laps, do push-ups. That's physical abuse. It's also doing contraindicated exercises with youth, things that will cause them damage. And again, water issues and overuse injuries, and often through overtraining. And in some sports, an inappropriate focus on unsafe weight loss. Psychological abuse is very much an issue, and probably the largest issue in sport. It's also called emotional abuse. It's the most common form of abuse. There's no real consensus on the definition, but there are characteristics which are universally recognized. There is a major power imbalance between the abuser and the victim, and the verbal abuse creates a negative self-image in the victim. Fat shaming is also a form of psychological abuse, and this often comes through a demand for weight loss, particularly in sports that are in weight categories, and it can in fact lead to eating disorders. Sexual abuse is the kind of abuse that creates major headlines, and we've seen this all around the world in every sport. And so this is one that we need to be particularly careful about. And one of the misconceptions is about who are the perpetrators of abuse. And these data come out of the Caribbean, and there's not much good data out there. But what it shows is that in emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual harassment, and in doing sexual harm, most of the perpetrators are teammates and peers. Second most common are coaches, and then after that, other adults and other children and youth. To work on this problem, international safeguarding standards have been created. And there are 8 standards that every sport, club, gym, dojo need to have in place. And they include written safeguarding policies, screening adults to make sure that inappropriate adults aren't working with children, written, clear standards of behavior of adults towards children, and educating adults and children and youth about exactly what abuse is. Other safeguards that are important is having a well-established buddy system so that each person in a sport has a good close friend that they can confide in, and if they're meeting with adults, that buddy goes with them. So in sport, we say for adults, never be alone with a child, and for children we say never be alone with an adult, and we call this the power of 2. 2 adults meeting with a single child, 2 children meeting with a single adult. Most important safeguard, in my view, is that every club, team, league needs a child safety officer. This is a person who's not in the club, not associated with the team, but everybody knows about. Teams advertise it, they make this person accessible and available, and this person is trained to work with children and youth. Often social workers, teachers can be brought in to this role. And the important thing about this role is that this individual meets with players in private to give them an opportunity to talk about what is going on in their team, in their league, in their sport. This child safety officer is trained in the process of asking players about their experience. They do not investigate suspicions or allegations of abuse or misconduct, but their role is to notify the right authorities. If it's a kind of a minor, poor policy, that might just be club officials. If it's abuse, that means going directly to the police or child welfare agencies. So, in summary, abuse will happen in your sport. It's everyone's concern, and better safeguarding needs to be developed by sports soon. Because if we don't develop it within sport, our safeguarding rules and regulations will be imposed on us by governments. And when we're developing safeguards, it needs to be done in partnership with all those involved, and that includes the children and youth. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin, and I hope that gives a good scene setting for the next three speakers, who will be our panelists and are going to tell us a little bit about different perspectives on safeguarding. One of the key things about safeguarding, it's important for everybody to play their part, and all of these different organisations or types of organisations play a critical role if we're going to have success in safeguarding. So our first speaker is Sarah Stevenson, and Sarah is the head of Child Safeguarding and Protection at the Centre for Sport and Human Rights. She has over 2 decades of experience working for and with children, particularly in terms of protection and safeguarding children from all forms of violence. She leads the Centre's program on child protection and safeguarding children in sport, and she has several years of prior experience working in the Partnership to End Violence Against Children, Child Fund Alliance, Plan International and Save the Children. And Sarah's going to be addressing a couple of questions for us today. The first one is, what is being done in terms of development of international standards?
We support, enable, and promote the prevention of human rights harms, access to effective remedy, and a positive human rights legacy from sport and sporting events. We are a coalition of governments, UN agencies, sports bodies, NGOs, trade unions, sponsors, and broadcasters who have come together as members of the Centre's Advisory Council. This network enables us to coordinate some of sport's most powerful actors to address human rights abuses across the globe. Our work is rooted in internationally recognized human rights standards. Children and youth are the most vulnerable of the groups that we seek to protect. And one of the key goals of the Centre is preventing violations of the rights of children and youth in sport and ensuring access to effective remedy of those harmed. The international safeguards for children in sport describe what organizations need to put into place if they are providing sports activities to children. What is the aim of the safeguards? It's about creating a safe sporting environment for all children in all parts of the world and at all levels of competition.
And then how can sporting federations, community organisations and other groups running sports programs on the ground put these standards into their programs? It's not so easy to translate them. How can they do that?
As we all know, the Kazan Action Plan calls for the recognition of the contribution of sport to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. SDG Target 16.2 calls for an end to all violence against children by 2030. SDG 5.2 calls for an end to all violence against women and girls by 2030. These two SDGs cannot be achieved if children and youth continue to experience violence and abuse in sport. Thus, we propose the adoption of 3 global objectives that mirror the indicators currently being developed to measure sports contributions to the SDGs. And these are that all national sport bodies have adopted formal policies to protect children and youth. That all national sports bodies have a nominated protection officer and nominated sport integrity officer. And that all athletes, coaches, and officials are trained on protecting children and youth. This is a shared global vision that by 2030, all children and youth engaged in sport are safe and protected. It's their right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being with you, and I wish you well.
Our second speaker is Lerina Bright, and Lerina is going to bring us a community perspective on child safeguarding in sport. Lerina is the founder and CEO of Mission 89, and that brings together her background in sports management with her commitment to combat trafficking. Mission 89 is a research, education and advocacy organisation that fights the exploitation of young athletes through social and economic transformation. She has also worked in previous jobs in a range of national and international sports federations, so is bringing a really strong sports perspective to this particular activity. She holds an MA in Sports Administration and a BA in International Studies in Economics. So we have 2 questions for Lerina as well. The first one is, as founder of Mission 89, an organisation that works as a research, education and advocacy entity to fight exploitation, what is your experience based on your research about the challenges to safeguarding children and young people in sports?
Millions of children and young people participate in sporting activities every day. Most do it for recreation and some as professional athletes. While the many benefits of practicing sport are widely reported and evidenced, there are also certain risk factors that are associated with the sport environment. These include violence, sexual exploitation, harassment, and discrimination. And now increasingly so, we're hearing a lot about mental health. But there are also less talked about risks such as doping, cyberbullying, gambling, and human trafficking, which is a form of exploitation in sport that my organization, Mission 89, helps to prevent. Children are considered rights holders, and organizations that provide activities to them are considered duty bearers, and so have a responsibility to safeguard them while in their care. Nevertheless, this can be difficult to achieve in practice. A big positive is that a lot of importance is now being given to this issue in sport, and organizations, clubs are moving towards more child-centered policies and sport regulations. However, there are some challenges in safeguarding children and young people from exploitation. And one of the main ones, in my opinion, has to do with terminologies used in the sport environment. For example, we often see child safeguarding and child protection used interchangeably, but while they're similar, they're two different things. The former, child safeguarding, is used to describe actions that are taken to promote the welfare of all children, and tends to have a preventative and reactive component that's embedded in policy, practices, and procedures, which are by and large aimed at limiting harm to children. Whereas child protection is a part of the safeguarding process and focuses on the individual child that's been identified as suffering or likely to suffer significant harm or neglect. It's important to understand this distinction as it is a key step to developing an effective approach to child safeguarding. Another challenge in safeguarding children in the sport environment is a lack of general education on the part of those working closely with them. There has to be the mindset that all persons working with kids need to have undergone child protection training. There has to be, and this means that coaches, scouts, physiotherapists, agents need to undergo this sort of training, and it needs to be part of a broader child safeguarding policy. A third challenge is information sharing. It's a major challenge because if it's not carried out efficiently and effectively, it can easily compromise the safety and well-being of athletes, but also their caretakers. A proper system needs to be in place that ensures a secure and efficient sharing of relevant information, but also takes into consideration national data protection laws, but still prioritizes the protection of children. This process is imperative for effective management of safeguarding and should include also a reporting component that involves a national child protection agencies, particularly when incidences occur that are outside the remit of the organization.
And our second question for Lerina is about good practices. So many federations and sports tackle issues of safeguarding in their daily work. What are some of the examples of best practices to promote safeguarding that you could share with us today?
Sport federations are obligated to protect their athletes from harm. A big positive, as I mentioned earlier, is that many of them are increasingly prioritizing the rights of children, and this is evidenced by child-centered policies and sport regulations that are founded on international conventions on child rights, and even sometimes incorporate best practice from other industries that are outside of sport. I think that international governing bodies such as the IOC, FIFA, the Commonwealth Games Federation, they have all developed and provide their members with a very comprehensive safeguarding policy frameworks that are based on international best practice. For example, the IOC's toolkit for IFs and National Olympic Committees, as well as the FIFA Guardians Child Safeguarding Toolkit for their member associations, are very comprehensive, with the latter using simple yet effective language, which is really important. We should, though, throw caution to the wind in that many of these safeguarding policies tend to be too broad and sometimes utilizes a one-size-fits-all approach, which makes it difficult to measure the efficacy of policies that are based on empirical measures. There remains still some gaps in many safeguarding policies. There's a lack of specific policies, for example, that ensure children who emigrate to a country for sporting reasons are given the same protection and rights as children who emigrate on human rights grounds. And of course, there are other human rights issues that are not captured in many safeguarding policies, including human trafficking. And that's the reason why our organization, Mission 89, collaborated with Good Corporation to develop such a framework that helps sport organizations address this particular and very specific issue in sport. It's important to say that safeguarding policies, even when taken when they take their origins from governing bodies, need to be contextualized to the environment and the national laws. One such federation that I believe is taking steps to do just that is the International Federation of Muay Thai Associations, that having launched their child safeguarding policy in 2019, have taken a step further to expand their risk registry to include human trafficking, which, even if it's not evidenced in the sport, by the mere fact that the sport is most popular in a country that lists human trafficking as a significant risk, shows a high level of responsibility and care by the Muay Thai Federation. And so I should say that child safeguarding policies, they cannot be developed and implemented as a one-size-fits-all. They absolutely need to be adapted to reflect the reality of the sport federation, both nationally and internationally.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Kim Encel. Kim works as a consultant on sport for development at UNESCO Hanoi and is a postdoctoral fellow with Deakin University in Australia. Kim has been developing a range of programs to engage young people in sport and physical activity, including the recently launched Winning Indoors, which supports physical activity for Vietnamese youth through an online platform, and UNESCO's Youth and Sport Task Force, which is providing opportunities for young people to promote sustainable development goals through sport. So Kim is going to tell us the perspectives of young people, as he's working a lot in youth programs and he is himself quite young. So the first question, as a young person, what do you think are some of the challenges to ensure sport is safe and free from abuse, given the stresses placed on young players?
The difficulty with safeguarding is that it is obviously very complex. A key area in which young people and challenge that needs to be overcome is in education. So education is really crucial to make sure that the environment in which you are playing sport in or participating in any way is safe. You need to know what the appropriate policies and processes that are in place at your specific sport club. This could be anything from the safety of the facility itself to whether the people who are instructing or coaching you have had appropriate background checks, or they have an appropriate understanding of what gender equality looks like, and making sure that everyone feels comfortable and safe. So broadly, I think the challenges are that we need to make sure that everyone within an organization, from the top level right down to the club, is aware of what is and isn't appropriate behavior. And a lot of the time that takes a while to achieve, but once it is achieved, there is certainly a high likelihood that a club or environment is much safer to be a part of.
And our second question, what role can young people play in being champions for safeguarding?
Now, this is a fantastic question and a really important one as well, because as a young person, you have a large responsibility in the safeguarding conversation in your club and also your organization. So what you need to really think about is, okay, find out what is going on in terms of safeguarding, in terms of policy in your club or organization. Find out if there is a policy. Do people higher up who are coaching you, instructing you, do they know what safeguarding is? So start asking these very basic questions to make sure that people at the high level, whether that's right at the top of the organization or at the really low level, just people who are coaching you, to make sure that they have an understanding of what safeguarding is. If they don't, that's where your voice is even more important. That's where you need to say, okay, we need to have safeguarding policies and procedures in place. We need to make sure that this is a safe and happy environment to participate in sport. And importantly, you need to make sure that the conversations you're having with your other athlete participants or your friends or your other people you're playing sport with, you need to make sure that they feel comfortable. So if someone is a little bit different, or if someone says something that maybe doesn't sit right with you or other people, make sure to say something. You want to make sure that whenever someone comes into the sporting environment, they feel comfortable. And that is really a really easy and helpful way to start the conversation of safeguarding, because if the environment is an inclusive and warm one, it's probably going to be a safe one too.
Thank you, Kim. And I'd just like to say in closing a big thanks to all of our speakers today. It's been a real pleasure to hear the different perspectives, and just wanting to leave you again with the final message. We all need to play our part. We want to close loopholes. We want to make sure that children and young people are safe, have a positive experience of being involved in sport, and stay part of the sporting family for many years to come. Thank you all.